Last year, the most valuable private company on earth earned $13 billion. It paid $17 billion of that to its landlord. Every single dollar it took in went to the company renting its computers. And then it went out and found $4 billion more. The company is OpenAI. The landlord is Microsoft. And Microsoft books that money as artificial intelligence revenue. As proof, the boom is real. Here is what makes that uncomfortable. Microsoft owns 27% of OpenAI. Amazon put $50 billion into OpenAI, and in the same announcement, OpenAI promised to spend $100 billion more with Amazon. Nvidia agreed to invest $30 billion in OpenAI. OpenAI buys chips from Nvidia. The money goes around in a circle, and on every lab, somebody books it as revenue. This year, 5 American companies plan to spend more than $750 billion building the infrastructure for it. And every time, someone points at the enormous profits flowing through the middle of the circle and tells you artificial intelligence is already paying for itself. That is not the payoff. That is the bill. 3 things in this video. Who is actually paying for all of this? What cracked 2 weeks ago while nobody was looking? And why an Indian company sitting inside our index fund is already down more than 40% because of a bet placed in California? Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Meta, Oracle. In April, all 5 told their investors what they tend to spend this year on artificial intelligence. Add it up, more than $750 billion in 1 year from 5 companies alone. This is roughly a fifth of India's entire economy. Every farm, every factory, every software export for a year, and 5 American companies will spend a fifth of it on computers. That is not what artificial intelligence has earned. That is what 5 companies plan to spend. And you can watch the physical world bending under it. The price of RAM, ordinary memory chip inside every phone and laptop on earth, nearly doubled in a single 3-month period. Not because phones got popular, because the scramble for AI hardware ate the world's supply. Your next laptop is more expensive because of a data center you will never see. And here is the detail that tells you what is really happening. Of Microsoft's $190 billion of spending this year, about $25 billion is not buying anything new. It is just the higher price of the same components, $25 billion, to buy the same amount of computers. Somebody in this story is making a fortune. It just isn't the people building the artificial intelligence. And every one of those dollars is being spent today against the revenue that is supposed to come in the future. So, what exactly is going to pay it back? Start with the company at the center. In all of 2025, OpenAI earned about $13 billion. It lost about $21 billion. Now, that is not a failing company. It's the fastest growing product in the history of software. And to be fair to them, they are getting better at it. In 2024, OpenAI spent $2.37 to earn back a single dollar. In 2025, that came down to $1.60. The losses got bigger. The machine got more efficient. Both are true at the same time. But look at what it has promised to spend. $250 billion to Microsoft, $138 billion to Amazon, more than $300 billion to Oracle. The chief executive of OpenAI put the total on the record himself. Around $1.4 trillion of computing commitments. The company takes in around $25 billion a year. It has promised roughly 56 times its annual revenue. That is not a gap, that's a chasm. And it can only be closed by growth that has never happened before in the history of business. And here somebody always says, yes, but Nvidia is making a fortune. Nvidia sold $194 billion worth of chips last year. Doesn't that prove artificial intelligence is making money? No. And understanding exactly why is the whole point of this video. Follow the money around full lap. In February, Amazon announced it was investing $50 billion into OpenAI. In the same announcement, OpenAI announced it was expanding its spending on Amazon's cloud by $100 billion. The supplier hands the customer $50 billion. The customer hands back $100 billion purchase order. And Amazon books it as cloud revenue, as demand, as proof. Now, here is a number Microsoft would rather you did not look at. Last quarter, Microsoft's new cloud booking went up 7%. If you take OpenAI out, including OpenAI, they were down 4%. The one customer everyone points to as a proof of boom is the reason the rest of the business looks like it's shrinking. Oracle has a contracted order book of $638 billion. It is the number that made Oracle a $1 trillion company. More than half of it, around $300 billion, is a single customer, OpenAI, a company that earned $13 billion last year. And then there is a sentence Nvidia put into its own filing with the American securities regulator. I'm going to read it exactly as it is written. We estimate that one AI research and development company contributed to a meaningful amount of revenue by purchasing cloud services from our customers. Nvidia is telling its regulator that a company it does not even sell to directly and has agreed to invest $30 billion in is a meaningful driver of its revenue. But the number that genuinely stopped me is this one. Last quarter, Nvidia made about $70 billion of profit before tax. Nearly $16 billion of that did not come from selling anything at all. It came from the rising value of Nvidia's shareholding in other AI companies. CoreWeave, OpenAI, a dozen more. Companies that buy Nvidia's chip. Roughly a quarter of Nvidia's profit last quarter was not chips. It was its own customers getting more value. And both Nvidia and AMD now both go a step further. They have started guaranteeing their customers data center leases. If the customer cannot pay, the chip company pays the landlord. And what do they get in return? Shares in the customer. There is a name for a supplier lending its customer the money to buy its own product and then booking that sale as revenue. It is called vendor financing. This is what Lucent and Nortel did in 1999. Both of them nearly died of it. If you want to see the physical choke point underneath every one of these chips, the handful of machines every one of these companies has to pass through, I broke down that in a video on TSMC and ASML. Now, the honest part, there is a serious argument on the other side and it deserves to be heard. Nvidia's chief executive, Jensen Huang, was asked directly whether all of this is circular. His answer, in his own word, was ridiculous. And on the arithmetic, he is largely right. Nvidia's entire portfolio of stake in private company is about $42 billion. The big cloud companies will spend $750 billion this year out of their own profit and out of the bond market, not out of Nvidia's pocket. So no, the AI boom is not funded by the chip companies. That would be a lie and you should be suspicious of anyone who tells you it is. Here is the true version and it is narrower and worse. It is not that the AI revenue is fake. It is that the fastest growing part of it is being bought by the company that do not make money yet. With money their own suppliers give them. That is not the payoff. That is the bill. In August 2025, the chief executive of OpenAI sat down with a small group of reporters and was asked whether investors had lost the plot. His answer, word for word, are we in a phase where investors as a whole are overexcited about AI? My opinion is yes. Is AI the most important thing to happen in a very long time? My opinion is also yes. Both halves of that matter. He is not confessing. He is saying this is a bubble and it is also real. Those are not contradictions. In 1999, both were true as well. And at the same dinner, he said his company would spend trillions of dollars on data centers, that economists would call it reckless and that he intended to do it anyway. He called it a bubble and he kept building. Which leaves one question. If the man running the biggest AI company on earth says the market is overexcited, why is every competitor spending more, not less? Because none of them can afford to be the one who stops. Microsoft cannot underspend Amazon. If Microsoft slows and Amazon does not, Microsoft loses the most important platform race in a generation. And executive who made that call never works at that level again. Amazon cannot underspend Google. Google cannot underspend Meta. Meta cannot underspend Microsoft. Every one of them is trapped in the same box. When your budget is set by what your competitor is spending, you're not making a decision. You're in a race that nobody is allowed to leave. Now, everything you have heard this far, the market already knew. And for 3 years, it did not care. Then in June, it started to. On the 5th of June, one chip company missed its forecast. In the day that followed, more than $1 trillion came off of the value of the global semiconductor industry. Microsoft and Meta both fell into a bear market. And then at the start of July came the detail that broke the story open. Bloomberg reported that Meta is quietly building a business to rent out its spare computing power. Spare power. A company that told its investor in April that it needed to spend up to $155 billion on computing has more of it than it can use. Chip stocks fell 12% in 2 sessions. Oracle, the company with the $638 billion order book, is down almost 30% in a month. The whole trade was built on one story, that there is never enough computing, that every chip is spoken for, and that story has started to wobble. One more thing, and this is the part that changes who this is about. Both of the biggest AI companies in the world now have quietly filed the paperwork to go public, which means these losses are about to stop being a private matter between billionaires. They're about to become something you can buy in a fund. Because this has happened before and people tell the story far too cheerfully. In the 1990s, companies laid 80 million miles of fiber optic cable. As little as 5% of it was ever switched on, and that dark, unused cable became the cheapest backbone of the internet. It is carrying this video to you right now. The infrastructure survived, the shareholders did not. Amazon fell 94% and took a decade to get back. Pet.com, Webvan, Global Crossing simply stopped existing. The technology works, the building gets used, and somebody still eats the loss. And a bubble does not end when the smart money works out that this is a bubble. The smart money has known that for years. It ends when the next check does not clear. At this point, a reasonable person thinks, I do not own Nvidia. I have never used ChatGPT. This is a story about California. It is not. It is already in your portfolio, just not the way you think. You were never secretly long this trade. You were secretly shorted. Look at Indian IT, industry that made India the back office of the world. The Nifty IT index is down roughly 42% from its peak. The IT companies inside the Nifty 50 are now less than 7.6% of the index, the lowest since at least 2002. And the reason investors give is one sentence. They think artificial intelligence destroys the thing that Indian IT was actually selling. Because Indian IT never really sold software. It sold cheaper people. A qualified engineer in Chennai doing the work of a much more expensive engineer in Chicago. That gap was the business. And a machine that writes code for a fraction of the cost does not compete with that business. It deletes it. Nobody in India bought an IT stock thinking they were making a bet on artificial intelligence. But they were on the losing side. And it sits inside almost every index fund and a great deal of retirement money in this country. That is the exposure nobody chose. And there is the other side of it. Reliance has committed $110 billion over the next 7 years to artificial intelligence and data centers. Adani is building towards 3 gigawatt of capacity. Last year, those two groups spent 3.2 lakh crore rupees between them, more than a quarter of all the private investment in India. And Reliance is one of the largest holdings in Nifty. So, if you own an Indian index fund, you're not watching this boom from a distance. You are funding it and you are losing at it at the same time. That is not the payoff. That is the bill. And here is what this is actually about. It is not about artificial intelligence. Every business has a circle. The AI circle is easy to see because the numbers are enormous and the companies are very famous. A supplier funds a customer. Customer buys from the supplier. The supplier books it as a revenue and the market calls it demand. Your circle is smaller. It is the exact same shape though. If you run a software company in Bangalore selling to a venture funded startup, your customer paying you with somebody else's money. When that somebody stops writing the check, it turns out the revenue was never really yours. And if you spent 20 years in Indian IT, your entire industry was a circle. One customer type, Western companies buying cheaper labor. It ran beautifully for 30 years and it is closing. So here is the one thing to take out of this video. Go and look at your 3 biggest customers and ask one question about each of them. Where does their money come from? If the honest question is from the same people who are funding me, from an investor, from a subsidiary, from a boom, then that is not a revenue. That is your own money coming back wearing a different coat altogether. Revenue is only real when it comes from outside the circle. Everything else is just a receipt. And the reason nobody puts this one down is the simplest thing in business. Not one of them can afford to be the person who was right too early. That is not the payoff. That is the bill. This channel takes apart the biggest bet being made in real time and shows you what it actually means for the people who never agreed to be a part of. If you want to keep watching this one unfold, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.